Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
It was upon a sodden evening in late June, when the Thames lay the colour of tarnished pewter, and the lamps along Baker Street showed haloed crowns in the drizzle, that an incident befell which, at the outset, seemed scarcely worthy of a line in my notes, and yet soon proved to be the trumpet call to one of the strangest inquiries in which my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes ever engaged. I had returned from my afternoon rounds with a damp coat and a mind disposed to nothing more ambitious than a fire and a modest supper, when our landlady ushered into the sitting-room a young lady whose composure suggested good breeding while her eyes betrayed a terror not yet spent. She was tall, spare, and plainly dressed. The veil she threw back revealed a countenance that would have been severe but for the tremor at the corners of the mouth. I observed on the glove of her left hand a faint smear of earth, a paler dust than London's soot, and on her cuff the ghost of a green stain such as might come of brushing against tender stems. Holmes, who had not long before consigned his violin to its case, and now lay languidly at length upon the settee, raised himself upon one elbow, and regarded her with that expression of grave courtesy which he reserved for those whom fear had driven to our door. "You are most welcome, madam," said he. "Pray warm yourself by the fire. You come, if I mistake not, from the west, Richmond or Kew, by way of Piccadilly, and a hired cab that changed horses in haste." Our visitor started. "From Kew, sir. How—" "Your skirt shows the lighter grit of the towpath, not the cinder of the city streets," Holmes replied. "And the perfume of your veil—no, not perfume. The breath of moist leaves argues a place of glass and greenery. The dew upon your hem was not gathered in Baker Street." The lady cast a quick, almost imploring glance at me before addressing Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, they tell me nothing can be done, that it is an affair for the coroner and no business for an inquiry beyond forms. But I cannot accept it. There is more, and I beg you to see it." Holmes indicated a chair. "You have done wisely to come, but begin at the beginning. I am Sherlock Holmes. This is my friend and chronicler, Dr. Watson." "I am Miss Beatrice Vale," she said, seating herself. "I am companion to Lady Frances Penrith of Foxbury House, near Kew Gardens. This afternoon, Dr. Watson, forgive me if I speak ill, this afternoon, in the Physic Garden on the south lawn, we found Sir Alistair Penrith lying upon the stone bench among the foxgloves. He was quite dead. There is a peculiar effect produced by the mention of sudden death when it falls upon a quiet room. The air seems to ripple, the clock asserts itself. Even the smallest sound, a coal settling in the grate, appears impertinently loud." Holmes steepled his fingers and bowed his head a little, as if acknowledging a name already familiar to him. "Sir Alistair Penrith," he murmured. "Baronet, a patron of the Royal Society and a trustee of the Botanic Gardens, a man of gout and iron views. Proceed, Miss Vale." "We were preparing for a charity garden fête to be held on Saturday," she said. Sir Alistair had ordered the old Physic Garden to be dressed, how he loved that narrow plot, with labels and little histories for the guests. The bed along the south wall is planted with Digitalis purpurea, foxglove, you know. Lady Frances asked me to fetch her shawl from the summer-house. I went, and from the doorway I saw Sir Alistair seated upon the bench as if in contemplation. He did not stir when I spoke. I approached, and then I saw that his face was strangely tranquil. There was nothing to mark violence, only his right hand— Here Miss Vale's own right hand closed involuntarily. It was clenched so tightly that the knuckles had blanched. "Had he any malady of the heart?" I asked. "Only the gout in his foot, sir," she answered. "The physician who was called, Mr. Sedgwick, said it was heart failure, perhaps brought on by excitement." But, Mr. Holmes, there were things, little things, that do not fit. Holmes's eyes grew brighter. We live by little things. Pray enumerate them. First, said Miss Vale, gathering courage, Sir Alister's walking-stick was propped against the bench, but the ferule was spotless, though the path was damp and the lawn wet with the day's showers. He could not have crossed the grass without marking it, and yet there was no track I could see. Second, a number of foxglove bells lay scattered on the bench beside him as if plucked, but they had been laid in a sort of fan, not dropped. Third, in the gravel at the path's turn someone had traced a crescent with a stick, and within the crescent had pressed 3 thimble shapes with a finger or some instrument. Lady Frances said it was nothing, a gardener's idle fancy, but I felt watched. A crescent and 3 thimbles, Holmes repeated softly. Pray continue. Lastly, she said, her voice sinking, the gate from the kitchen yard to the physic garden was found locked from within, the key not upon its hook, but in the lock itself. Yet Mrs. Branwell, the housekeeper, swears she left it upon the hook at noon, and Sir Alister had no key on his person when he was found. I cannot reconcile it, nor can I accept that a strong man, irritable but otherwise well, should sit among the foxgloves and quietly die, arranging flowers as if composing a message. Holmes rose and went to the mantel, where he stood in profile, the fine-cut features and hawk nose sharp against the glow. "Dr. Watson," said he, "you recall the paper by Letherby on the cumulative effects of digitalis?" No, do not consult your memory too furiously. I do not require an answer now. Miss Vale, was there any scent upon the air unusual to such a place? Foxglove has little to commend the nose. She considered. There was, how shall I put it? A faint sharpness, not quite medicinal, like varnish or new paint. Ha! Holmes's exclamation was very soft. He faced her fully. You have told me enough to justify an immediate visit. Scotland Yard? They haven't been summoned, she said. Lady Frances wished to avoid any scene. Mr. Sedgwick promised to notify the authorities in the morning if necessary. Then the scene is yet undisturbed, Holmes observed. Miss Vale, does Foxbury House possess a gardener of jealous temper, a secretary with debts, or a nephew in want of his remainder? Spare me the catalogue. We shall read it in their faces by and by. What I must know is whether the dead man had enemies. She hesitated. Sir Alister made a study, some would say an obsession, of rare cultivars. He quarrelled bitterly with a Mr. Edwin Larks, a nurseryman of Isleworth, over a shipment of exotica meant for Foxbury's winter house. There was also a dispute with the trustees about a bequest to the gardens. But enemies, Sir Alister collected those as other men collect medals. Holmes's smile was as swift as it was thin. A man who arranges his enemies in rows will sometimes find himself the centrepiece of the display. Watson, your coat. Miss Vale, if we are to see this garden in the guise it wore this afternoon, we must not lose the hour. Miss Vale rose with visible relief, but paused at the door, as if some recollection had taken her by the sleeve. There is one thing more. When I took Sir Alister's hand, forgive me, I felt beneath his palm the faintest papery crackle. Later, when they lifted him, Mr. Sedgwick and the butler, it was gone. I said nothing. They would have laughed at me. But I am sure, Mr. Holmes, that there was a slip of something, perhaps a label from the beds, trapped there. He had grasped it as he died. Holmes' grey eyes, which had been cool and quick as a falcon's, grew momentarily distant, as if they stared through her and along some inner avenue lined with facts. A label, he said, almost to himself. In a physic garden everything is labelled, and the living profit by the names of the dead. He turned brisk again. Come, Watson, the game, it seems, has dressed itself in foxglove. Thus it was that with the rain knitting a finer pattern upon the panes, We descended to the street and took a cab for Kew. I confess that even my practical training could not cool the prickle of anticipation that ran along my skin. A tranquil face upon a garden bench, a locked gate, a crescent scrawled in the gravel, the idle fan of purple bells. These were the little things upon which my friend fed as an eagle upon the marrow of bones. And as the wheels splashed through the summer dusk, I saw in the quick set of Holmes's mouth that he too had scented in this quiet death the first stirrings of a most uncommon hunt. The cab set us down before Foxbury House just as the lamps within stirred behind their shades. Rain frayed into mist across the lawns. Miss Vale led us by a side door into a corridor smelling of beeswax and wet wool. A single umbrella dripped in a tray. We were met by a capable woman with a mouth trained to tightness. "Mrs. Branwell," said Miss Vale, "these gentlemen are from Baker Street?" The housekeeper's eyes flicked from my muddy shoe to Holmes's immaculate boot. "My lady awaits you," she said. Lady Frances Penrith received us in the south drawing-room, a tall figure in mourning. "Mr. Holmes, I thank you. Sir Alistair lies in the chapel. Mr. Sedgwick will inform the coroner at daybreak. If you require anything—" "Only that we see the Physic Garden as it stood," Holmes replied. "A lantern, and someone to show us." "Perkins will attend," she said. The butler appeared with a lamp. We passed through the winter garden and out into the damp breath of night. The rain had dwindled to a fine weeping. The physic bed stretched in narrow ranks. Holmes paused at the gate from the kitchen yard. The key projected from the inner ward. He examined the latch, then the paint. "No bruising," he murmured. He bent, inhaled, and smiled without mirth. "Varnish, poorly cured." Perkins cleared his throat. "Hobbs, the gardener, touched up the benches in the summer house this morning, sir." Holmes nodded and passed on. We reached the stone bench along the south wall, half sheltered by brick that still held the day's warmth. The foxglove bells hung like purple lanterns. Upon the seat lay the fan of blossoms Miss Vale had described, arranged, not fallen. Holmes's gaze travelled the scatter of petals at the far end, the spotless ferrule of Sir Alistair's stick, the crescent traced at the turn of the path. "Note the spacing," he said. "Too even for idleness, too small for a boot." He pressed my forefinger into one of 3 dimples within the crescent. "Not the breadth of a man's finger. A thimble would leave such a rim if battered." Miss Vale drew closer. "Could Sir Alistair have made it himself?" "Not unless he died composing puzzles," Holmes said. He crouched, peered beneath the bench, and with his penknife teased out a sliver of card no larger than a thumbnail. "There is your papery crackle, digitalis lanata, woolly foxglove." Torn by a wrench, not lifted. Perkins shook his head. Sir Alistair plucked labels when he lectured guests. "He lectured none today," Holmes returned. He skirted the wall to a narrow door into the tool yard. Its bolt lay shot within. Low by the jamb, a smear of mortar bore specks of purple dust. "Pollen," he said. He looked to Miss Vale. "You brushed the plants?" "I did, passing," she said, glancing at the green ghost upon her cuff. At the summer house he ran a finger along the bench. It came away tacky. "A clever fellow might take a key in such varnish, make an impression, and restore the original to its hook. But why hurry? And why this ceremony of crescent and bells?" "Theft," I suggested. "Those exotica for the winter house?" "No theft," said Holmes softly. "Ritual, message, or camouflage?" He lifted the arranged bells one by one, sniffed, and replaced them. "No tincture. If digitalis struck, it did not come by the obvious chalice." Steps crunched on the gravel. Mr. Sedgwick, a narrow gentleman with anxious whiskers, advanced with a frown. I protest this rummaging, but her ladyship insists. Heart failure, agitation, and a weak constitution. Any lip discoloration? Holmes asked. Irregularity, inconsistent with syncope? I conducted the usual examination, Sedgwick answered. Which is to say we must make our own. Holmes remained courteous. At cockcrow I shall speak with Hobbs, and with a Mr. Edwin Larks of Isleworth. I would also see anyone here who sews. He tapped the triple dents. Where there is a thimble, there is a thread. We turned back toward the house. At the threshold, Holmes paused, considering the solitary umbrella. Perkins, who came in last? The young Mr. Penrith, sir, said the butler. Sir Alistair's nephew. He dined out and returned at 8. Was he admitted by this door? He let himself in, sir? With whose key? Asked Holmes lightly. His own, I presume? Holmes's eyes brightened. Presumptions are excellent until taken for facts. He looked to Miss Vale. Tell me, did Sir Alistair take tea in the garden? Not today. He spoke of his gout and kept to the bench. He sent me for Lady Frances's shawl. And when you returned, he was gone from speech but not from posture, Holmes said. A tranquil arrangement for a violent interruption. You perceive, Watson, how the locked gate, the varnish, and the fan of bells form a triangle whose third angle we have yet to name, which is the hand unseen. We will view the body now, he said, and afterward the study where Sir Alistair kept his herbals. There is a missing aroma in this garden, and I think it lingers in paper, indeed. We were conducted through a dim corridor that smelled faintly of camphor until we reached the small chapel where Sir Alistair Penrith's body lay. A single taper flickered at the foot of the bier, and the long shadows seemed to waver upon the stone walls as though uneasy at the presence of the dead. The baronet had been placed upon a raised couch, his face composed, the lips pale with only the slightest bluish tinge at their corners. His right hand still bore the mark of its violent clasp, though it now lay open and lifeless. Holmes approached without hesitation, his keen eyes travelling over every inch of the figure, while I, accustomed though I was to scenes of mortality, felt a shiver creep through me. Holmes bent over the body and, without touching, observed the mouth and the line of the throat. He muttered something about constriction, then produced his magnifying lens and examined the fingertips. He beckoned me closer and pointed. Observe, Watson, the nail beds, a faint mottling, almost imperceptible, but present nonetheless. A physician with a cautious eye might call this cyanosis, though a less careful one would dismiss it. He moved to the baronet's breast pocket and withdrew a square of linen. And this, do you mark the faint smear? It was pale, greenish, almost invisible against the white. Foxglove pollen, not from idly brushing against a plant, for the deposition is singular, as though he clutched the blossom itself, yet we found the flowers arranged in a fan upon the bench. Why should a dying man compose so deliberate a tableau? I could not answer, but the implication chilled me. Holmes restored the linen, then stepped back, folding his arms. Poison, Watson. Subtle, gradual, cumulative. I shall not yet declare the medium, but there is no doubt in my mind. This man did not die by nature's sudden betrayal, but by design. Miss Vale, who had stood apart, gave a small gasp, but restrained herself quickly. Holmes turned to her. Now you mention the missing slip of card. It is of more consequence than you imagine. A man dies holding evidence and someone removes it. We must learn who had the boldness to meddle with the dead. We left the chapel, and Holmes requested to be shown Sir Alistair's study. It was a square, wood-panelled chamber at the front of the house, its shelves crammed with herbals, gardening treatises, and folios of botanical sketches. A faint odour of dried herbs clung to the place, intermingled with pipe smoke. Holmes went directly to the writing desk, where a neat array of correspondence lay tied in ribbon. He sorted them rapidly, murmuring as his eye flew over each address. Larks of Isleworth, here more than once. A quarrel evident in the tone, judging by the pressure of the pen strokes. And, see this, an invoice from a chemical supplier in Lambeth. Digitalis tincture ordered last month. The good baronet was experimenting, no doubt. I ventured that the tincture might have been intended for medical research. Possibly, Holmes agreed. Yet the dosage required to strengthen the heart is a hair's breadth from that which stops it altogether. A perilous playground for a man with enemies. He rifled the drawers until he produced a small tin, still faintly tacky with varnish. So our painter's implement resides here, not in the gardener's shed. Interesting. A knock came at the door, and in entered a young man, not more than 25, with the air of one whose self-assurance strives to cover unease. He was introduced as Charles Penrith, nephew and heir, presumptive. Holmes regarded him with polite detachment. "You were abroad this evening, Mr. Penrith." "I dined in town," the young man said. "A most dreadful business. My uncle's heart, they say. I cannot credit it. He was irascible, yes, but hardy." Holmes inclined his head. "And you returned at 8? By which door?" "The side door, naturally. I have my own key." Holmes's gaze flickered almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. And you found the household in commotion?" "Not yet. It was near 9 before the alarm spread." Holmes studied him a moment longer, then dismissed him with courtesy. When the door closed, he turned to me with a glint in his eye. "Watson, recall that the butler stated the young man used his own key. Yet the gate to the physic garden was found locked from within, the key abandoned there. If Sir Alister's nephew entered freely, how does one account for the displaced key?" We were still pondering this when Mrs. Branwell, the housekeeper, entered with a tray of tea. Holmes thanked her gravely and, when she had gone, examined the cups. He sniffed the pot, dabbed a drop upon his fingertip, and tasted cautiously. Harmless enough. Yet tea, Watson, is an admirable medium for many things besides refreshment. One wonders whether Sir Alister partook earlier in the afternoon. Miss Vale shook her head. "He took only water while we set the labels." "Water?" Holmes said sharply. "From where?" "From the pitcher in the summer-house." Holmes strode to the door. "Then, Watson, we must inspect that pitcher, for if ever there was a vessel for mischief, it stands waiting in the rain, at Kew." The summer-house still smelled of varnish, heavy and acrid. The pitcher remained upon the bench, half filled with water gone cold. Holmes poured a measure into a glass, lifted it to the lamplight, and smiled grimly. "A faint shimmer, Watson. Insoluble particles clinging to the surface. We are on the scent." He replaced the pitcher, then closed the door behind us. "This house holds more than grief. It holds cunning. And by tomorrow's sun we shall see the mask begin to slip." We returned to the main hall, where the hush of morning lay upon every stair and panel. Holmes's eyes, however, gleamed with a hunter's light. He whispered to me, "Note well the nephew, the varnish, the vanished label, and the water. 4 clues upon the board. When the 5th is laid, the whole pattern shall emerge. Until then, we keep our counsel, lest the fox among these foxgloves grow wary of the hound upon his track." The following morning broke clear after the night's rain, and the lawns of Foxbury House glittered with beads of water that clung to each blade like glass. I rose early and found Holmes already astir, his lean form silhouetted against the window of our chamber as he peered through the pale mist that hovered above the gardens. He turned as I stirred, his eyes alive with that peculiar brightness I had come to associate with the scent of a trail. "Watson," said he, "today we must secure the missing link. Observe. Sir Alistair's death was neither sudden nor chance. We have the varnish, the vanished label, and the water from the pitcher. These are facts. What we lack is the hand that bound them together." Miss Vale awaited us in the breakfast room, pale but resolute. She informed us that Lady Frances had taken to her chambers with grief, while the nephew, Charles Penrith, was abroad in the stables. "Mr. Hobbs, the gardener, is also in the yard if you wish to speak with him," she added. Holmes rose at once. "It is precisely Mr. Hobbs I wish to see, for it is in the earth and the flowers that truth so often hides." We stepped out into the yard where Hobbs, a thick-set man with arms like cordwood, was trimming damp rose bushes. He greeted us with a curt nod, his eyes narrowing beneath heavy brows. "You tended the physic garden yesterday?" Holmes asked. "Aye, sir. Been my charge these 10 years. Sir Alistair was particular about it, wanted every stem labelled neat for his fate." Holmes studied him keenly. "And did you notice aught unusual about the foxgloves?" Hobbs grunted. "They're poisonous, sir. Always told the maids to keep their hands off. Pretty but deadly. Nothing unusual beyond that, though I'll say this. Someone's been meddling. I found petals scattered on the gravel where they shouldn't be. Didn't like it." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Indeed. And you varnished the benches in the summer house yesterday?" "That I did." "Sir Alistair wanted them ready for guests. Took the tin from his study, as he directed." Holmes's voice was mild. "And you replaced the tin there afterward?" "I left it in the study, sir, just as I found it." Holmes glanced at me, then back at Hobbs. "Very good. One last point. Did you see Sir Alistair afternoon?" "No, sir. He kept to the garden with Miss Vale. By the time I went to the shed, he wasn't in sight." Satisfied, Holmes thanked him, and we returned to the house. As we walked, he muttered, "Mark that, Watson. The varnish tin came from the study by Sir Alistair's own order. That connects him with the tool that could fashion a false key. Yet the question is, did he order it innocently, or did another place it there for convenience?" We had scarce re-entered the hall when we encountered Charles Penrith descending the stairs, his riding-coat slung carelessly over one shoulder. His face bore the freshness of one who had slept soundly, a curious contrast to the household's gloom. "You are early abroad, sir," Holmes remarked. "I ride to Richmond," the young man replied airily. "There is little I can do here but mourn." Holmes's voice was silky. "You were fond of your uncle?" Charles shrugged. "Fond enough, though he was not the gentlest of men. He was stern, and his fortune stricter still. But family is family." His eyes darted briefly toward Miss Vale before he turned away. When he had gone, Holmes murmured, "There, Watson. Note the ease with which he shrugs at death, and the glance at Miss Vale. A man with secrets rarely keeps them wholly in check." Holmes then requested to see the picture from the summer house once more. Perkins, the butler, brought it, still containing a little of the water. Holmes poured it carefully into a clean dish and sprinkled a powder from a small vial he carried. The liquid clouded faintly, settling into a dull sediment. "Digitalis," Holmes pronounced, "enough to still a man's heart in a quarter hour. The preparation is crude but effective. It was placed there with intent." Miss Vale clasped her hands tightly. "Then it was murder indeed?" Holmes inclined his head. "Beyond doubt. Now we must ask who had access to this picture and who the motive to use it. Hobbs swears he did not touch it. Lady Frances would scarcely risk so public a method. That leaves the household at large, and importantly, those who knew Sir Alistair drank from it." At that moment, Mrs. Branwell entered, her expression troubled. "Beg pardon, sir," she said, "but I thought you should know. In tidying the study this morning, I found a slip of paper fallen behind the desk. It bears Sir Alister's hand." She produced it, and Holmes took it delicately. The paper was indeed scrawled in a bold, angular hand. It read simply, "Beware the crescent, L." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The crescent traced in the gravel, Watson, and the initial L, Mr. Edwin Larks, the nurseryman of Isleworth. He is woven deeper in this than mere trade quarrels." The housekeeper looked alarmed. "Is it dangerous, sir?" "Danger is the ink in which villains write," Holmes replied calmly. "Tell Lady Frances I shall call upon Mr. Larks this afternoon. Until then, no one is to drink or eat, save from your own hand, Mrs. Branwell." She curtsied and withdrew. Holmes turned to us with quiet intensity. "We have our line. Larks, the crescent, and the poison water form one thread. Charles Penrith, and the key another. Which is warp and which is weft we shall learn soon enough. But rest assured, Watson, the pattern is tightening. The fox among the foxgloves believes himself secure, but with another day's light I shall draw him from his lair." And with that he snapped shut his notebook, his lean face set in the keen anticipation of the hunt, while the great house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the revelation that surely loomed just beyond the horizon of the day. We departed Foxbury House shortly after luncheon, Holmes insisting that we make for Isleworth at once to confront the nurseryman, Edwin Larks. The cab ride was long and rattling, the road flanked by hedgerows heavy with rain, and though Holmes was silent, I could see the fever of calculation at work in his eyes. He tapped his long fingers upon the sill, and more than once his lips formed words without sound, as if rehearsing the logic that already stirred within his mind. I ventured to suggest that the mysterious slip of paper might be Sir Alister's dying attempt at a warning. "Indeed," Holmes replied absently. "A dying man clutches at evidence, but it is rare he has the leisure to inscribe it. I question whether the note was composed at the moment of death or written earlier as a precaution. That, Watson, is the hinge upon which much depends." Isleworth lay dull under a pale sun, its river-bank lined with timber yards and hothouses. We found Larks's establishment at the end of a lane where the air was thick with the mingled odours of damp soil and strange blooms. Rows of glass houses stretched behind a modest office, their panes beaded with condensation. A tall man with a stoop, his hair unkempt and his coat smudged with soil, emerged as we approached. "You are Mr. Edwin Larks?" Holmes asked. "That's me," said the man, his eyes flicking warily between us. "If it's about Sir Alister, I've heard. Can't say I'm sorry. He made life hard for me." Holmes's tone was cool. "And yet he left a note in his own hand bearing the words, 'Beware the crescent, L.' One could take that to mean you." Larks flushed angrily. "I've no hand in his death, if that's what you imply. I had quarrels with him, true, but over plants, not blood. He cheated me, took specimens I'd procured from abroad, then claimed them as his own. I warned him he'd answer for it, but only in court, not the grave." Holmes regarded him keenly. "What do you know of crescents, Mr. Larks?" The man frowned. "Crescents? Nothing. Unless you mean the crescent beds he planned for the fete. He wrote me weeks ago demanding I supply foxgloves in bloom enough to fill a crescent-shaped border. I refused. My stock was low and I wouldn't be robbed again." Holmes's eyes glittered. "A crescent-shaped border," he murmured. "Curious indeed. You see, Watson, how each fragment aligns with its fellows. Sir Alister wrote of the crescent and signed with an L. Was he warning himself of Larks, or using Larks's initial as cover for another hand entirely? We pressed the nurseryman further, but he had little more to offer. At last, Holmes requested to see his books of trade, which Larks produced reluctantly. Holmes ran a thin finger along the entries, pausing at one marked with bold strokes. To Foxbury House, a consignment of woolly foxglove, digitalis lanata, delivered in March, signed by your assistant? Larks scowled. I sent them. He paid, though not without haggling, but I swear I never set foot on his ground since. Holmes closed the ledger. That is all for now. Pray remain at hand should I need you. With a nod he turned on his heel, and we returned to our cab. As the road carried us back toward London, Holmes's thoughts poured forth in rapid succession. Consider it, Watson. A consignment of woolly foxglove, precisely the plant named upon the torn label Sir Alister held. The same label vanished from his grasp in death. Why? Because it bore more than the plant's name, perhaps a mark, perhaps a message. Someone feared discovery and removed it. And who would know that such a label existed, save one familiar with the garden's order? You suspect the household, I ventured. Undoubtedly. Hobbs knew, but his blunt honesty hardly masks cunning. Charles Penrith knew as heir, and more, he had access and motive. And then there is Miss Vale, I started. Miss Vale? Surely not. She was the one who came to you, imploring help. Holmes smiled faintly. And yet many a desperate move is cloaked in apparent candour. I accuse no one yet. But let us not dismiss any thread. Miss Vale herself admitted brushing the foxgloves. What if her stain was not accidental? We reached Baker Street as twilight deepened. Holmes lit his pipe and sat long in silence, clouds wreathing about him while I waited. At last he spoke. "Tomorrow, Watson, we shall summon young Mr. Penrith to this room. His nonchalance masks either innocence or calculation. I mean to shake that composure. But tonight there is something subtler. I would know who had opportunity to alter that pitcher of water. Did it stand in the summer-house all day, or was it placed there nearer the hour of death?" Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes tore it open, and his eyes gleamed as he read. "From Lestrade," he said. "He has heard of the matter and insists upon joining. He will be at Foxbury by morning. That will suit me. Scotland Yard's blunt instrument is sometimes a useful foil. We shall let him believe he leads, while the real quarry edges closer to the trap." He rose, pacing the hearthrug with quick strides, his voice dropping to that familiar tone of suppressed excitement. "Yes, Watson, it is coiling tighter, a poisoned pitcher, a vanished label, a crescent scrawled in gravel, a note signed with an L. Each seems unconnected, yet each points to a mind that delights in pattern. Tomorrow we shall begin to see that mind exposed, and when it breaks cover, I intend to be waiting." The coals in the grate sank lower, and though fatigue weighed upon me, I felt the same spark of anticipation that stirred my companion. The hunt was narrowing, the circle drawing in. Somewhere amid the foxgloves of Foxbury, a murderer moved in silence, unaware that Sherlock Holmes had already marked the shape of his shadow. True to Holmes's prediction, Inspector Lestrade arrived at Foxbury the following morning with his customary briskness, his boots already carrying the dust of the early train. He greeted us with his usual mixture of respect and defensiveness, for he had learned by experience that Holmes's presence on a case was at once his greatest aid and his greatest irritation. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he said, rubbing his hands together as he glanced about the sombre hall, "we've a death that smells suspicious. Word is you were called first. What have you uncovered?" Holmes smiled, thinly. "Enough to know it is no natural passing, Lestrade. Sir Alister Penrith was poisoned, digitalis, introduced most probably into the water pitcher of the summer house. A note in his hand warns of a crescent and an initial L, which may implicate a nurseryman, Edwin Larks. But we must not let letters blind us. The true mischief lies nearer to home. Lestrade snorted. Poison, is it? Well, that would make matters simpler. Everyone here is under suspicion, and we'll question them all. Where shall we begin? Holmes gestured toward the drawing-room, where the family had gathered at Lady Frances's request. The widow herself sat in a high-backed chair, pale but controlled, her hands folded upon her lap. Miss Vale stood behind her, watchful. Charles Penrith lounged carelessly by the mantel, attempting an air of detachment, while Mrs. Branwell hovered near the door, wringing her hands. Holmes took a seat opposite them, his long fingers steepled. "Lady Frances," said he, "I regret to intrude upon your grief, but truth is the highest courtesy we can pay the dead. May I ask whether Sir Alistair had enemies beyond the disputes already mentioned?" Her ladyship shook her head slowly. "He was a difficult man, Mr. Holmes, but few dared cross him. His quarrels were always about plants, not people. He cared for little else." Holmes turned his gaze to Charles. "And you, sir, did you benefit by his death?" The young man laughed lightly. "I inherit, yes, but surely you cannot think I hastened it. My uncle was a tyrant, but murder is another matter altogether." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "You were abroad at dinner in town, returning at 8. Tell me, who dined with you?" Charles hesitated only a fraction. "An old school friend, Mr. Atkins, at the Crown and Anchor. He will vouch for me." Holmes inclined his head, but did not smile. "We shall confirm that. But there is another matter, the key with which you entered. Perkins declared you had your own. Yet I have seen no such key upon your ring. May I examine it?" With a frown, Charles produced a set of keys. Holmes examined them swiftly, then returned them with a peculiar smile. "Interesting. None of these fits the side door. Did you misplace it?" Charles flushed slightly. "Perhaps I left it in town. I had no cause to use it yesterday." "Yet you entered by that door," Holmes said softly. "An inconsistency, Mr. Penrith, is often more telling than a confession. We shall revisit this presently." Before Charles could reply, Lestrade interjected impatiently. "All this about keys and crescents. What of this nurseryman Larks? He seems the likeliest fellow. Bad blood, financial quarrels, and his initial on the note." Holmes shook his head. "Too obvious, Lestrade. Sir Alistair may have written that warning, but if so, it was to draw attention away from the true hand. Ask yourself, why would a murderer leave behind his own initial as a calling card? No, the crescent and the letter are part of the disguise." Miss Vale, who had stood silent until now, spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Holmes, might not Sir Alistair have foreseen the attempt and written the note to himself, as a reminder of the danger?" Holmes's gaze rested on her keenly. "You are astute, Miss Vale. Indeed, that is one possibility. But then we must ask, why was the label torn from the foxglove bed and found in his hand? That label, too, vanished afterward. Someone here knows more of it than they admit." The silence that followed was heavy. At last Mrs. Branwell wrung her hands. "Sir, I beg you not to look at me. I found nothing but the note. The label you speak of, I never saw it." Holmes studied her kindly. "Fear not, madam. If you had meddled with evidence, you would not speak so freely. No, the label was taken swiftly, almost at the moment of death. That requires presence at the scene." His words cast a sudden pall upon the room. Lady Frances gasped faintly, and Miss Vale placed a hand upon her shoulder. Charles Penrith shifted uneasily, his bravado faltering. Holmes rose abruptly. "We shall walk once more to the physic garden. Lestrade, bring Mr. Penrith and Miss Vale. The truth will not remain buried among foxgloves." We filed out beneath a sombre sky, the dew still clinging to leaves. Holmes led us to the stone bench, his eyes darting to every corner. He crouched, brushing the gravel aside until the faint marks of the crescent reappeared. "Behold," said he, "the stage of our drama. Here Sir Alistair sat, here the flowers were arranged, here the message was drawn, and here, somewhere within arm's reach, lies the secret of the missing label." With sudden energy he plunged his hand beneath the bench, withdrawing not one slip of card, but a crumpled fragment of parchment, stained and faintly damp. He smoothed it out upon his knee. The print upon it read, "Digitalis lanata, woolly foxglove," but beneath the name someone had scrawled in ink, "The heir shall drink and follow." A collective gasp arose. Charles Penrith's face went ashen. Lestrade seized his arm roughly. "So, a warning indeed, and who else but you, sir, stood to inherit?" Holmes lifted his hand. "Not so fast. This inscription may condemn, or it may deceive. It was not written in Sir Alistair's hand. No, this is another's script entirely. The question is, was it meant as prophecy or as trap? Until we know, let us keep an open mind." Charles stammered furiously. "I never saw that paper before. Someone has contrived to set it against me." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps. But whether trap or truth, the snare tightens. The crescent, the label, the poisoned water, all point to deliberate design. We are close, Watson, perilously close, to unmasking the true hand behind the Foxgloves' death." And as the clouds thickened overhead, it seemed to me that the air of the garden grew charged with a tension, almost palpable, as though the very flowers leaned to overhear the revelation that hovered just beyond Holmes's lips. The fragment of parchment trembled slightly in Holmes's hand, as though the damp air still clung to it, and for a long moment no one spoke. Charles Penrith's face was rigid, his lips parted but voiceless, while Lady Frances pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Lestrade's grip upon the young man's arm tightened, but Holmes, with a swift gesture, bade him release it. "Inspector," he said evenly, "a trap too obvious is sometimes bait for the wrong prey. Let us not spring upon the nearest suspect until the whole mechanism is revealed. This handwriting is not Sir Alistair's, nor is it young Mr. Penrith's. The slant is different, the loops of the letters tighter. It is a hand accustomed to keeping records swiftly and without flourish. Think of who in this household makes entries, lists, or labels." Miss Vale's breath caught audibly. Her face coloured, though whether with indignation or fear I could not then determine. Holmes turned the paper toward her. "Does it strike you as familiar?" She looked quickly away. I cannot say. It could be anyone's." Holmes tucked the slip carefully into his case. "We shall discover soon enough. For now, let us return indoors, where the light will serve us better." Once in the study, Holmes spread before us a collection of writings: Sir Alistair's letters, a note from the butler, and a small memorandum left by Mrs. Branwell upon the desk. He compared each to the scrawl upon the foxglove label, his eyes darting with hawk-like precision. At last he held up a slip bearing neat lists of household supplies. "This, Watson, is written by Mrs. Branwell, the housekeeper. Compare the roundness of the O, the sharp break of the H, quite distinct. Now here, in the gardener Hobbes's account book, we find bold, heavy strokes, nothing like our fragment. And yet observe this." From a folder he produced a short note that Miss Vale had sent to Lady Frances requesting a shawl be brought down 2 days earlier. The hand was smaller, cramped, and the resemblance undeniable. "The very same contractions," Holmes murmured, "and the loop of the F betrays the writer. Our fragment is in Miss Vale's hand." The revelation struck the room like a thunderclap. Miss Vale recoiled, colour draining from her cheeks. "No, you are mistaken. I never wrote such words." Holmes's voice was calm, almost kind. "It is your hand, Miss Vale, yet that does not condemn you. Consider, was it written freely or under compulsion? Did you pen it as part of a warning, or was it used afterward to incriminate you?" Her eyes flashed with sudden tears. "I swear, Mr. Holmes, I never wrote those words. I did copy labels for Sir Alister when Hobbs was busy, but nothing more. If that is my writing, it was taken from some earlier label, altered, and planted. Someone seeks to ruin me." Holmes regarded her intently. "That is precisely what I consider possible. For there is cunning here, Watson, deeper than the blunt instrument of greed. The murderer weaves evidence not merely to escape, but to mislead. He places initials, crescents, labels, and even another's handwriting in the path. Such artifice betrays a mind practiced in manipulation." Lestrade gave a grunt. "If she swears she didn't write it, perhaps she didn't. Still, it's more muddle than progress. I like it simple. A man dies, another gains, and there's your culprit. The nephew inherits, so why chase shadows?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Because shadows often conceal the true shape. If Charles Penrith were guilty, would he leave a paper crying out, 'The heir shall drink'? Too blatant by half. No, our murderer's aim is subtler, to cast suspicion upon both the nephew and the companion, while he himself remains invisible." Lady Frances spoke suddenly, her voice low but steady. "Mr. Holmes, who among us would have such skill? My husband kept his circle small. He trusted Hobbs with the grounds, Mrs. Branwell with the household, and Miss Vale with my own comfort. Charles was no more than a tolerated heir. I cannot conceive that any of them possessed such artifice." Holmes tapped the edge of the desk thoughtfully. "And yet, Lady Frances, someone here possessed knowledge of botany, of foxgloves' lethal nature, of labels and their order, and of access to both study and garden. That narrows the field considerably." The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock upon the mantel. At last, Holmes rose. "Inspector, we must pursue 2 lines at once. First, we shall trace the source of the poison more precisely. The tincture ordered from Lambeth may prove significant. Second, we must watch for the next move. The murderer, having staged so elaborate a deception, will not rest content until he believes suspicion has fully settled upon his chosen scapegoat. Already, Miss Vale stands perilously upon that edge. It would not surprise me if some fresh discovery were to appear, further condemning her." He moved toward the door, his coat swirling about him. "Watson, we remain at Foxbury tonight. The house itself may yet betray its secret." And so the evening descended once more upon that uneasy household. The family dined in strained silence, each glance wary, each gesture taut with unspoken fear. Holmes, however, seemed in excellent spirits, as though the very darkness quickened his resolve. He paced the halls with his lantern, noting doors, locks, and windows, while I followed, weary but alert. At length, near midnight, as we paused by the winter garden, Holmes placed a hand upon my shoulder. "Mark me, Watson, before the morrow closes, the true author of this death will be forced to reveal himself. He has sown too many seeds of deception, and soon the harvest shall betray him. Until then, we must be watchful, for I suspect he will strike again, not with foxglove this time, but with subtler tools to silence one who knows too much." His eyes flicked toward the dim figure of Miss Vale crossing the hall with a candle, her shadow wavering upon the panelled wall. "Yes," he murmured, "our companion is in peril, and through her safety lies the path to the truth." And as the house settled into uneasy slumber, I felt that peculiar tightening of the air that precedes revelation, as though the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for Holmes to draw forth the last hidden thread of the mystery. The night within Foxbury House was heavy with unease, though no storm disturbed the skies. Every board creaked with suspicion, every shifting draught seemed to carry menace. I found myself unable to rest, and so I kept to the sitting room with my journal half open, though no words would come. Holmes was nowhere to be seen, though I knew by long habit that he prowled the house, as silent as a shadow, testing locks and observing faces unseen. Toward 2 in the morning, when even the restless lamps in the corridor had dimmed to their last glow, I heard a faint rustle outside the window and then the muffled pad of Holmes's step. He entered quietly, his face alight with the peculiar excitement of discovery. "Watson," he said in a whisper, "it begins. Our adversary has moved again. I have just come from the passage near the study. Someone attempted to force the desk drawer, clumsily but with purpose. The fragment we recovered has stirred him to act. He fears what further papers may remain hidden." I rose at once. "And did you see who?" Holmes's mouth curved slightly. "Not yet, but I mark the impression left upon the varnished drawer. A ring, broad and worn. Who among them wears such a ring?" I thought swiftly. "Not Charles Penrith, his hands are bare, nor Miss Vale, nor Mrs. Branwell. Only Hobbs the gardener wears a thick band upon his right hand, plain brass." "Just so," Holmes murmured. "And Hobbs was accounted for at that hour by no one, a curious gardener indeed, who tends roses by day and studies desk locks by night. We must tread carefully. This evidence does not prove guilt, but it proves fear. He seeks to erase traces, which means he has more knowledge than he has confessed." At dawn, Holmes requested that the household gather once more in the drawing-room. Lestrade, who had spent the night uncomfortably in an armchair, muttered protests but complied, eager to assert his presence. The household filed in, pale and bleary-eyed, Miss Vale clutching her shawl, Lady Frances leaning heavily upon a chair, Charles ill-tempered and impatient, and Hobbs, with his heavy boots, still caked in garden soil. Holmes stood before the mantel, the picture of composure. "Sir Alister's death," he began, "was achieved with skill, but also with vanity. The murderer not only killed, but sought to embroider his crime with flourishes, crescents, initials, labels, and false handwriting. Such contrivances are the hallmarks of a mind that delights in stagecraft. Last night another act was played upon that stage. Someone sought to tamper with the study drawer, hoping to remove what might remain hidden there. That person left behind the mark of a broad brass ring. All eyes turned at once to Hobbs, who flushed a dark red. "I did no such thing," he bellowed. "I've served here faithful these 10 years. Holmes raised a hand. "No one accuses you yet, my good fellow, but explain if you can why your ring left its impression upon the varnish of the drawer." Hobbs's jaw worked furiously. I did go into the study last night. I wanted to see if Sir Alister had left word about the fate. He often left notes in the drawer for me. I meant no harm." Holmes studied him with piercing calm. "Perhaps. Yet the timing is poor. When a master is dead and suspicion rampant, midnight visits to his desk are ill-advised. Still, if your motive was honest, you have nothing to fear, for I know now that you are not the hand which poisoned him." A murmur rippled through the room. Lestrade bristled. "And how do you know that, Mr. Holmes?" "Because," Holmes said, "the poison was introduced into the water pitcher in the summer-house at an hour when Hobbs was verifiably labouring with the roses under the eye of Lady Frances herself. I asked her yesterday whether she saw him in the afternoon, and she confirmed it. He could not have slipped away unseen. No, our culprit is of more subtle habits." He turned his gaze suddenly upon Charles Penrith. "Sir, your alibi rests upon Mr. Atkins at the Crown and Anchor. I telegraphed last night, and the reply has already come. He did not dine with you on the evening of your uncle's death. You were not in town at all." Charles leapt to his feet, his face white. "That's a lie. He must have forgotten. Atkins is a careless fellow. Careless enough to deny meeting his friend upon the very night of his uncle's passing." Holmes's voice was sharp. "No, Mr. Penrith, your falsehood betrays you. But here lies the subtlety. Had you been the poisoner, you would not have so clumsily woven snares of labels and crescents. You are reckless, not artful. Someone else placed those embellishments, knowing they would fall heavily upon you once your lie was discovered." Charles's bravado crumbled, and he sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Lady Frances gave a low cry, while Miss Vale stood trembling at her mistress's side. Holmes allowed the silence to linger, then spoke in a softer tone. "The truth, Watson, draws nearer. We see now that our culprit is not the heir, though he lied for reasons of his own. He is not the gardener, though his ring betrayed him at a foolish hour. No, the hand we seek is one who moves easily between rooms, who has access to both study and garden, who knows of labels and their scripts, who tends to the household yet passes unnoticed, and above all, one whose mind revels in diversion and disguise. The fox has circled close, and soon he shall spring into view." He closed his case with a snap and looked around the stricken faces. "Until then, each of you must remain under this roof. I will not permit another step outside until the last thread is woven, for the killer is here, among us still, and the next move he makes will bind him beyond escape." As his words echoed against the panelled walls, I saw each face stiffen, guilt, fear, suspicion, all mingling like shadows upon a restless canvas, and in that instant I felt the very air tighten, as if the house itself braced for the revelation that Holmes promised was soon to come. The atmosphere in the drawing-room remained taut after Holmes's declaration, each member of the household shifting uneasily under the weight of suspicion. The fire hissed faintly in the grate, but its warmth did little to ease the chill that seemed to pervade the air. Lady Frances clutched her handkerchief tightly, while Charles brooded in sullen silence, his denial half-spoken and then abandoned. Miss Vale's eyes shone with suppressed emotion, and Hobbs stood stiff and defensive, his great hands clenched as though he might break the silence by force. Holmes, however, was as calm as ever, his expression that of a man who sees the shape of the puzzle but waits for the final piece to fall into place. "Inspector Lestrade," he said at last, "the temptation is to seize upon the most obvious scapegoat and close the matter swiftly, but to do so now would be folly. Our adversary has laboured to scatter false trails like crumbs for pigeons. I will not oblige him by pecking at them. Instead, I propose we wait, watch, and allow him to betray himself." Lestrade grumbled, but nodded, clearly unwilling to challenge Holmes's confidence. "And how long do you reckon we must wait, Mr. Holmes?" "Not long," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing. "The guilty cannot resist meddling further, especially when they believe suspicion is safely diverted. You have already seen how evidence appears at the most convenient of times, notes, labels, warnings. Such artifices will not cease until the culprit feels the noose is tightening." At that moment, Perkins entered quietly, bearing a folded sheet of paper. "Beg pardon, sir," he said, "but I found this upon the hall table just now. It is addressed to Inspector Lestrade." Lestrade took it with surprise, broke the seal, and frowned as his eyes skimmed the lines. "Well, here's something indeed. It says that Miss Beatrice Vale was seen placing the foxglove label beneath Sir Alistair's hand before the alarm was raised. It claims she was the last near the body." Miss Vale let out a cry of indignation, her face white as marble. "That is false! I did no such thing!" Holmes reached for the letter. He examined it swiftly, his lips curving into a sardonic smile. Exactly as I expected. Another fabrication, cast like a stone into still water to see how far the ripples spread. Note the hand, Watson, the same cramped style as the label itself, attempting to mimic Miss Vale's script, but the attempt is clumsy. The natural slope of her hand bends leftward, this bends right. The forger, in his eagerness, overreached. Lestrade scowled. Then who put it on the table? Holmes's gaze swept the room. That, Inspector, is the question. Only one among us could have planted it unseen. Perkins, you found it. At what hour? Not 10 minutes past, sir. I was coming from the pantry when I spied it upon the table. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely. Our culprit grows impatient. He believes Miss Vale must be crushed beneath a final weight of evidence. Yet in so doing, he has shown his hand too freely. A deception so crude betrays not genius, but desperation. Miss Vale sank into a chair, overcome by the weight of accusation, and Lady Frances murmured soothing words. Charles watched with a mixture of relief and suspicion, while Hobbs glowered as though longing to denounce someone outright. Holmes, however, leaned back against the mantel, his manner deceptively languid. There remains only one way to draw the spider from his web. We must fashion our own snare. Inspector, I will require your cooperation and your silence. Watson, you must play your part also. Tonight we shall pretend to retire early, leaving the house to its uneasy sleep. In truth, we shall keep watch, each at our appointed place, for I am convinced that the murderer will strike again, perhaps not with poison, but with the pen, the key, or the knife. He must act to secure his safety, and in acting he will reveal himself. The household broke apart soon after, each to their own chamber, though none seemed likely to find peace in slumber. Holmes and I withdrew ostensibly to our rooms, but as the evening deepened, he led me back down the narrow stair that opened toward the winter garden. The moonlight filtered faintly through the glass, casting pale shadows across the flagstones. Holmes motioned me to silence, and indicated a darkened alcove where we might observe unseen. We had not long to wait. Shortly after midnight, a faint creak announced a figure descending the stairs. Cloaked in shadow, the person moved swiftly across the hall, pausing only to glance about before approaching the study door. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm, a signal to hold still. The intruder drew forth a key, one fashioned from a mould, I had no doubt, and pressed it carefully into the lock. The door opened without sound, and the figure slipped inside. Holmes was already in motion, gliding noiselessly across the tiles until he stood just beyond the threshold. I followed, my heart pounding, and together we entered the study, where the faint light of a lantern revealed the stooped form of Mrs. Branwell. The housekeeper, rifling feverishly through the drawers, she spun with a gasp as Holmes's voice cut the silence. So, Mrs. Branwell, the keeper of keys and records, reveals herself at last. I had wondered when you would play your final card. The woman's face was grey with terror, her hands trembling as she dropped the papers she had seized. No, Mr. Holmes, you are mistaken. I sought only to protect my lady. Sir Alister was cruel, he would have ruined her. Holmes's eyes glittered. Enough. The poison, the false notes, the planted labels. It was your handiwork. Who better than the housekeeper, ever present yet unseen, to move freely between kitchen, study, and garden? Who better to imitate another's script, to know the order of the labels, to place and remove at will? And who more motivated than one who feared for her mistress's fortune, should Sir Alister squander it upon his obsessions? She covered her face with shaking hands. I never meant him to die so soon. I thought a dose would weaken him, frighten him into yielding. But he drank more than I intended, and when he fell, I panicked. I arranged the flowers, I took the label. I thought to cast suspicion elsewhere. Holmes's voice was cold as steel. Your vanity betrayed you. You could not resist weaving your story with crescents and initials, as though crime were a drama to be dressed. Yet in the end, it is the very excess of your deceit that unmasked you. At his signal, Lestrade, who had been waiting in the passage, stepped forward with grim efficiency. Mrs. Branwell sank into a chair, sobbing bitterly, the fight gone from her. Holmes folded his arms, his gaze distant. "There, Watson, is the end of the masquerade. The fox among the foxgloves has shown her teeth at last. But though the play is done, the lesson remains, that vanity in crime is ever its undoing. Mark that well." And in the silence that followed, I felt both relief and sorrow, for the hand that poured poison had once been steady in service, and the household, though freed of suspicion, would never again know the peace it had lost. The confession of Mrs. Branwell hung in the air like a noose suspended above the room. Yet Holmes did not allow the inspector to drag her away at once. Instead, he motioned for Lestrade to hold back, his eyes fixed on the trembling figure before us. There was a weight in his expression I had rarely seen, something that told me the puzzle was not yet fully solved, though we stood upon the brink. "You admit to dosing the water," Holmes said quietly, "yet your words betray more than guilt. They betray calculation. You claim to have acted to frighten Sir Alistair into yielding. That might account for one tampered picture. But what of the label torn and planted, the note scrawled, 'The heir shall drink and follow,' the forged letter implicating Miss Vale? These were no accidents of panic, madam, but deliberate measures prepared before and after the fatal hour. You were not merely careless, you were conducting a campaign." Mrs. Branwell raised her tear-streaked face, her hands twisting together in hopeless agitation. I thought if suspicion fell elsewhere, my lady would be spared the scandal. Sir Alistair's temper grew worse with every day. He threatened to cut off Lady Frances, to leave the estate in ruin, to see Charles disinherited unless he married where his uncle dictated. I saw no mercy in him, Mr. Holmes, only destruction. I acted out of loyalty." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Loyalty is a dangerous spur when yoked to vanity. You fancied yourself a saviour, yet you became an architect of deceit. Still," and here his tone shifted, softer, though no less commanding, "I do not believe you acted alone. The writing upon that label, the very idea of crescents and symbols, these are not the tools of a practical housekeeper. You were guided, or else encouraged." She hesitated, a flicker of something passing over her features, but she remained silent. Holmes bent close, his voice a low, piercing thread. "Who stood behind you? Who whispered that Sir Alistair's obsessions could be turned to ruin? Speak, for if you do not, the full weight of this crime will crush you alone." A long pause followed, broken only by the faint crack of the fire. At last she whispered, "I cannot. To speak is to condemn her ladyship." The room stirred in shock. Lady Frances half rose, pale as death. "Mrs. Branwell, what are you saying?" But Holmes's hand rose again, commanding silence. His eyes had not left the housekeeper's face. "No, Watson, not Lady Frances," he murmured. "She has the grief of one betrayed, not the cunning of one who plots. Yet note the words carefully. To condemn her ladyship, which means that whoever directed this crime meant it to appear as though Lady Frances herself had a hand in it, should suspicion reach too far. That, I think, is the last veil torn aside." He turned suddenly, his gaze striking upon Charles Penrith like a blade. The young man, who had seemed relieved moments earlier, now stiffened beneath Holmes's scrutiny. "You lied about your alibi," Holmes said, his voice like flint. "You admitted as much in your faltering, but more than a lie clings to you. The scheme of this crime bears your stamp. You lacked the nerve to deliver the poison, so you found in Mrs. Branwell a tool, a woman whose devotion could be twisted into action. You whispered to her that Sir Alistair would destroy all, that only a little fear was needed to bring him to heel. You pressed her into adding the dose, and when his death came swifter than either of you foresaw, you seized the moment. You planted the crescents, forged the notes, scattered suspicion upon Miss Vale and even upon your aunt. You counted upon the inspector's eagerness to clutch the nearest thread, while you stepped forward as the disinherited heir transformed into victim. That, sir, was your theatre. Charles sprang to his feet, colour blazing across his face. That is monstrous. Lies. I never. Holmes's hand darted into his pocket, producing the slip of parchment with its threatening scrawl. Then explain this. The ink is fresh, written within the last 2 days, and upon the edge, do you see it, Watson? A faint smudge of varnish, the very same that still clings to your cuff, Mr. Penrith. You leaned upon the summer-house bench as you worked the trick of the false key, and the evidence betrayed you. A careless actor, but a dangerous one. Lestrade's face hardened, and he stepped forward. By heaven, Mr. Holmes, if that's true, the man is finished. The ring mark led us astray, but the varnish clinches it. Charles's defiance crumbled. He sank back, his hands trembling. I only meant he drove me to it. He would never let me live free, never allow me to wed as I pleased. He bound every coin, every acre with his will. Yes, I pressed Mrs. Branwell. I told her it would only frighten him. But when he died, I knew all eyes would turn upon me. So I made it seem a puzzle, something too strange to be mine. I meant to escape the hounds by scattering false scent. His words faltered into silence. Lady Frances covered her face, sobbing softly, while Miss Vale stood rigid, her eyes wide with horror. Hobbs muttered an oath under his breath, his great hands twisting helplessly. Holmes's voice cut through the gloom, quiet yet inexorable. You overreached, Mr. Penrith. You sought to weave a tapestry of deception, but your vanity betrayed you, as it did Mrs. Branwell. You played the dramatist where silence would have served, and now the play is ended. Lestrade stepped forward with grim satisfaction, producing his cuffs. Charles Penrith offered no resistance as they were placed upon his wrists. Mrs. Branwell sat slumped, her sobs echoing through the chamber, while Holmes turned away, his face unreadable. Later, as we rode back toward Baker Street, I ventured to speak. Holmes, I confess I thought Mrs. Branwell the culprit entire, yet you saw deeper. Holmes smiled faintly, though without triumph. She was the instrument, Watson, not the hand that played. Crimes such as these seldom spring from one root alone. There is always the planner, and there is always the tool. To confuse them is the common error. Our task is to know which is which. And Miss Vale? I asked quietly. She will be exonerated, Holmes said, but she has had her first glimpse of how thin a veil separates loyalty from ruin. It is a lesson few forget. He leaned back against the seat, his eyes closing as the cab jolted over the cobbles. You see, Watson, vanity in crime is more fatal than the poison itself. The cleverest scheme fails when the culprit cannot resist embellishment. A crescent in the gravel, a note with an initial, a label with a threat, all were added strokes upon the canvas. And it was those strokes, not the draught of digitalis, that sealed Charles Penrith's fate. The lamps of London grew brighter as we approached the familiar outline of Baker Street. Holmes stirred, his features softening, and he murmured, as if to himself, "Another life saved from the shadow of false suspicion, another life claimed by ambition's folly. So the world turns, Watson. and we but trace its darker patterns." And with that he gathered his coat about him, already receding into the quiet depths of thought, while I, filled with awe at his relentless clarity, resolved once more to set down every step of this strange and intricate case for those who would marvel at the genius of Sherlock Holmes. The morning after Charles Penrith's arrest, the air at Foxbury was lighter, as though the oppressive mist of suspicion had at last been lifted. The police cart bore him away under Lestrade's charge, and Mrs. Branwell, though not entirely spared, was treated more as a misguided accomplice than as the author of the crime. Lady Frances, pale but composed, thanked Holmes with a dignity that belied her grief. "You have given truth to this house, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice trembling, "and though it has brought sorrow, it has also brought clarity. For that I am grateful." Holmes bowed slightly, his manner grave. "Truth is seldom gentle, my lady, but it is always just. Sir Alistair's obsessions proved the very soil in which the crime was planted, yet it was human folly, vanity, and ambition that bore the fatal flower." Miss Vale, who had been under suspicion more cruelly than any, approached us quietly. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. Without your intervention, I would have borne the weight of a crime I never conceived." Her eyes shone with a mix of relief and lingering fear, for she had looked over the precipice of ruin and been drawn back. Holmes merely inclined his head, though I saw a rare softness flicker in his expression. On the ride back to Baker Street, I pressed Holmes upon one point that lingered with me still. "You said, Holmes, that vanity was the undoing of both culprit and accomplice. Do you believe the crime might have gone undiscovered had they kept to simplicity?" Holmes's eyes half closed, and a thin smile played across his lips. "Perhaps, Watson, a plain act of poison, with no crescents, no notes, no theatrics, such might have passed for a tragic seizure of the heart. But criminals are rarely content with silence. They crave drama, recognition, even in shadow. Charles Penrith could not resist weaving symbols and letters to mislead. Mrs. Branwell could not resist imagining herself guardian of her ladyship's honour. Each embellishment was another thread for me to seize, and in seizing, to unravel the tapestry entire. "And what of Lady Frances?" I asked. "She is left with scandal, with grief, and with the burden of an estate shadowed by crime." "Time will temper scandal," Holmes replied. "Grief must have its way, but peace will return. As for the estate, sometimes the pruning of a poisonous branch allows the tree to flourish once more." He leaned back as our cab rattled into the fog of London, his long fingers steepled, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the present. "It is the way of the world, Watson. Among foxgloves, both beautiful and deadly, one must learn to discern the harmless from the fatal. Sir Alistair did not and paid the price. His nephew sought to master deception, but he forgot that truth, though hidden, will always bloom in the end. Thus ended the curious affair of the death among the foxgloves, in which vanity served as the murderer's most damning accomplice, and in which Sherlock Holmes once more demonstrated that beneath the intricate disguises of men, the logic of truth remains the surest compass. And as I set down the tale, I could not help but marvel that where all others had seen only mystery, Holmes had seen a pattern, woven as delicately as the bell of a flower, and as fatally as its poison.